Hello and welcome into the Cubs on Deck podcast. My name is Greg Huss. I am one of your hosts, and today I am joined by my co-host Bryan Smith. Bryan, it has been over a month since we have recorded together, which is kind of wild. We've had a wild schedule. Glad to have you back, dude.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. It's good to switch back into minor league mode, not think so much about the big league team, and that lets us put our optimistic hats on, which is always nice.
Dude, it cracks me up. So when we started the show, we're on episode 66 now. So when we started the show a while back, what was it,
Yeah,
last it would have been before last season, right? It would have been the off season before last. And when we started this, I was like, all right, like I had the show with Jimmy going for a few years, and I was thinking, okay, like when we're starting up this show, it's kind of a weird timing because we're starting up a minor league podcast just as the Cubs are starting to get good, and people will care a lot less about what's going on with the prospects, and they'll be focusing on the major league action because like people care about this stuff outside of like weirdos like you and me. Like people care about the prospects. It just comes in waves, right? As the big league team is
as a
good,
way to
people care
function
less.
their major league interest. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. So I was like, like people won't be quite as interested in the show as the big league Cubs get better. And we're sitting here a year and a half later, I guess. And really dating back to my show with Jimmy. Like we're dating back to Jimmy and I started that back in I think 2019 was when we started that. So it's like I've only done the show when people are looking for prospects for like some sort of pushing them through, getting them through their days, which is kind of crazy.
we're also at that part of the cycle of frustration with the major league team where people are now like number one, number two farm system. Like I haven't seen it in the majors. Like I don't think that's real. And like we're kind of in this awkward spot of of feeling like we can promise that like minor leaguers will help the Cubs in the next couple of years, but you also don't know, will they help enough for it to matter, like to send them to the playoffs? And it is that sort of, that frustration is bubbling, and it then touches like all parts of the organization, which is too bad. I think in the sense of, if you follow minor league baseball, like part of the reason you're doing it is to like remain optimistic through all cycles of your major league team. And, um, you know, I want to keep that cynicism as far away from my, unbridled minor league purity as possible.
Well, it's like it. So I went on the Setup Man. I went on his show over on YouTube. Go check that out. This past week, and he focuses on major league action for the most part, obviously. And when he was asking me like, who could we see? And actually, I was listening to Sahadev Sharma and Patrick Mooney, their show. What is it? North Side Territory, their podcast, and
Yeah.
they were talking about the same topic of like, who can we see? Like, who can come up to the major league level and help this team right now from as far as prospects go? And when I was on the Setup Man show, I felt like such a just a Debbie Downer, right? Like oh, like who can this guy help? Can this guy help? And I just kept saying I kept finding myself saying like we shouldn't expect him to like really make a huge impact in Chicago. Like I just said that over and over and over again. I was like,
Right.
wow, that kind of sucks, you know? And it's like but it's fine. I think like coming from our perspective, I think it's fine to say that where it's like you shouldn't be. We're kind of hitting this first wave of like really strong prospects, like top 100 type prospects. Because we've had the Matt Mervises and the Alexander Canarios and guys like that. Like
Right.
those aren't top 100 guys. But now we're getting Pete Crow Armstrong, like Cade Horton, obviously injured right now, but not too far away. Owen Casey in AAA. Like we're getting that first wave of like actual impact guys that are ready for Chicago. But they are not like we shouldn't expect them to make.
They can't be saviors.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
shouldn't be. They shouldn't be expected to be that right away. Now,
Right.
can we expect Owen Casey to be an all-star in a few years? Like, yeah, like I hope that's the case. But like Owen Casey's not going to come up now that Mike Tauchman might be injured and play right field every day or play center field or left field or whatever for the Cubs and be an all-star. Like that's not what we should expect.
I mean, when you have a $220 million payroll, like what the farm system allows you to do is two things. It allows you to like use the farm system to make trades for players that are getting too expensive for their small market teams. And then it allows, if you like the player and you keep him in your organization, then you have a player at the minimum that you can then spend more money at the rest of the positions. And so, it's going to be what the Cubs are going to have to use their farm system for in the next 18 months is to find impact, like major league impact in other places. And then the prospects aren't saviors. They're just guys that are sort of helping raise the floor further and further. So, hopefully that can happen, whether it be through trades or on the free agent market this winter. But, it is going to have to happen. It's not going to be the farm system that makes this team a World Series contender. That's just, that happens pretty rarely.
Yeah.
Even the 2016 Cubs, who, if you recall, won a World Series there.
People forget that.
The farm system played a huge, gigantic role in that team, but like we all know that team doesn't win a World Series without a couple huge free agent moves that they made and trades that they made along the way too. So like that farm system allowed them to go get John Lester and Ben Zobrist and even Aroldis Chapman.
Yeah, your NLCS MVP and your World Series MVP were both free agent signings. So There you go. All right, we got a pretty big show today. We're just running through some headlines. There's no trickiness to the show. We're not doing any different fun, super fun things. It's just there's some headlines we need to talk about, and we're gonna get into in this show.
We kind of have, we got Greg Huss went on a field trip. Basically, that's what's leading our show. We're here. We're gonna hear about your field trip.
Yeah, honestly, so I went over to the South Bend Cubs were playing in Peoria, which, as you guys know, is not too far from where I live, and so I got to watch the South Bend Cubs play there. Both of those teams, both Peoria, the Peoria Chiefs, and the South Bend Cubs, record wise, not great this year, and really, the South Bend Cubs are not a team loaded with a whole bunch of high end prospects, but it was still fun to go watch. So I went over to that series. I watched on Tuesday, on Friday, Saturday, Sunday this past week. Saw some good things. We're gonna get into that a little bit on the show. I want to lead off with a crazy ump show. Eventually, we'll get into the Moises Ballesteros news that he was promoted to Iowa. We'll get into talking about Frankie Scalzo and his promotion to Iowa, James Triantos and his non-promotion to Iowa. We got Cristian Hernandez. We'll talk about him a little bit today. We got some Ethan Roberts talk, which is something we love to do on this show. And then we're going to end the show by giving a shout out to a former Cubs prospect. So stick around for the end for that. But like I said, I want to start with what I saw on Sunday. It's not prospect related at all, but like I watched this happen on Sunday in Peoria for the South Bend Cubs game, and I tweeted out right away that I'm going to have to explain it on the show because a simple series of tweets does not do it justice. The ump show that took place in Peoria on Sunday was I texted Max Toma, the broadcaster for the Cubs, and I go, man, those umps are ready for the major leagues the way they know how to put on a show. Like they're ready to roll. So I'll get into the big thing that happened later in the game, but I want to start off with in the fifth inning. I think it was the fifth inning. It was middle of the game. The Peoria Chiefs had a runner on. So I'm going to do my best to try to paint a picture with all these things because it's going to be tough here on podcast form. So in the middle innings, the Peoria Chiefs had a runner on third base, and there was a pass ball or a wild pitch thrown by the pitcher. Ball went straight to the backstop, and it actually ricocheted and bounced back off pretty hard so that Casey Opitz, who was catching, didn't have to go too far to corral the wild pitch. The runner was trying to score on the wild pitch from third. Casey Opitz fielded the ball, threw the ball to Sam Armstrong, who was pitching. Or was it Sam Armstrong? Sam Armstrong was pitching, I believe, that game. He grabs the ball, tries to tag the runner, does tag the runner, and the ump calls the runner out, which seemed like the right call. But during the slide, the ball popped out of the pitcher's glove. It went flying out. The ump didn't see it, so he called the runner out. In the process, the runner pointed to the ball and shouted at the umpire, was yelling pretty good at the umpire that the ball had come loose. And so the ump turned around, saw that the ball was out, corrected his call, called the runner safe. And as soon as he got done calling the runner safe, he tossed the runner. He ejected him from the game. It's the first time I've ever seen an umpire corrected by somebody on the field and then immediately toss him. I've never seen something like that in my entire life. It was what? It was all in like one motion. It was safe, you're out. It was insane. So
yeah, I mean, you can imagine he said like the ball's out, you blah 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 blah. And
I'm sure he said the magic word. I'm sure he said some magic words, but it was nothing I've ever seen before to correctly point out something to the umpire that convinces the umpire that like he was wrong and still get tossed. So that was fun. And then later in the game, so now we're Flash forward to later in the game. It is the bottom of the 11th inning, and was Angel Gonzalez was on the mound for the South Bend Cubs. And pardon me if I'm getting the exact setup of the runners wrong, but the 9-hole hitter for the Peoria Chiefs was up to bat. There's runners on, I believe, first and seconds with nobody out, and Trey Richardson was the batter. He was trying to bunt those runners on or over to second and third because it's a tie ball game in the bottom of the 11th. They just need to score 1 run to win it all. So in the process of bunting, Angel Gonzalez throws 2 pitches that were pretty high and tight. Now they weren't like at the guy's head, but when you're kind of leaned over to bunt, it's a little bit easier to get him high and tight. So Richardson kind of reacts pretty crazily, like he's a little over the top reaction in my opinion. Nothing too crazy, but just kind of like a little too much. So because of that, there's a little bit of chirping from the Peoria dugout. There's a little bit of chirping back from the South Bend dugout. They're kind of it's not going great here. But mind you, it's the 11th inning. They're not trying. He's not trying to hit Richardson because you don't want to put the runner on third, the game-winning run on third base. There's no ill will in this matchup here. So the umpire hears the chirping back and forth, and he warns the pitcher. He warns both dugouts, which I thought was a little premature in the warnings. That seemed a little excessive. But he warns everybody. Next pitch, Gonzalez hits Trey Richardson, hits him with a pitch. So in theory, like he just warned both benches and the pitcher. Like he's kind of got to toss him at that point, right? Like he hit the guy after he gave the warning. He's got to toss him. So there's a lot of chirping back from the Peoria dugout, and the umpire does not toss Gonzalez. He keeps him in the game, which is crazy. So then there's a lot of discussion back and forth. All right, so at this point, he strikes out or he gets a pop out and a strikeout with the bases loaded, and it's like he's going to get out of this thing. It's crazy. Well, there's 2 outs, 2 strikes, bases loaded, bottom of the 11th inning. Angel Gonzalez goes to pitch and gets called for a balk. A runner scores, game over, balk off win for the Peoria Chiefs. Nothing I've ever seen before. He was tossed immediately. He started yelling at the base ump who called the balk. Lovello comes out running from the dugout. He gets ejected, the manager. Both get ejected after the game's already complete. It's already over. The game's over, and they still get tossed. It was those combination of things. It was just a combination of stuff that I loved. It was great. It made it for a great action.
Did the Eugene Emeralds win the championship a few years back on a balk call? Am I remembering that right?
I think it was. Yeah, it was the championship. Yeah,
I think it was Emmanuel Classe by the Indians.
It was.
I think it was. Yeah,
that's crazy.
So pretty similar. I mean, the only thing I can think of that like is like that at all.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I just thought it was too good not to share here on the show. I know it's not directly prospect related, but I was like, oh my God, and honestly, I probably wouldn't have gotten that whole thing. If I was not at the game, I wouldn't have got that whole thing just watching MILB TV. So it was worth the price of admission to go to the South Bend Cubs game on Sunday through the 95-degree heat. So that was still fun.
When minor league baseball went to the 1 series a week thing, I had a couple players tell me that like it gets so much chirpier between the dugouts by the weekend than they were ever used to before. It sort of breeds hostility. So it's kind of fun when that comes out and shows itself, but it could also, sometimes it could be dangerous or sometimes it could just be ridiculous.
Yeah. By Saturday and Sunday, those guys are sick and tired of looking at each other's faces.
Very much.
Like nothing can go wrong, and they're just like, I'm tired of facing you. I'm tired. Yeah. I don't want to face you again. Especially when relievers were like on like day 3 of going, right? Like if Gonzalez threw 3 times this past week, it's like that's a little much, but. Okay, man. Let's transition out of that. Talk about actual prospect action. Drew Gray threw on Friday night. He threw on Friday night. He was part of a 7-inning ball game as a part of a doubleheader. And in that game, he ended up. Let me try to pull up.
I got it.
You got it pulled up.
Yeah, he only registered 1 out. He walked 6 batters. The 1 out he registered was a strikeout. Overall, he threw 37 pitches, 12 for strikes. Obviously was taken out of the game. The Cubs essentially will take out pitchers when they get past the 35 pitch mark in an inning. So he got taken out then. obviously just going to sort of do a number on those season-long numbers and stuff like that. But, it's something we've seen before. But I guess, first and foremost, tell us what it was like to be in the ballpark sort of watching it.
Yeah, so I didn't have a view right behind home plate, so I couldn't see exactly where the pitches were coming in. But I will say that he was getting squeezed quite a bit. Now, that's no excuse or defense, because no matter how much you're getting squeezed, walking that many guys and throwing that few amount of strikes, like that just can't happen. I think it is telling of him over the course of this entire season. But he was getting squeezed about quite a bit. So uh, did he deserve, what do you say, 6 walks? No, he probably didn't deserve 6 walks. He might have deserved 3 or 4 walks. But it was just one of those things where it was a long inning. He came out of we were talking at the game. It's ended up being 0 hits after the first inning, but I believe 5 runs scored in that first inning with 0 hits. It's like, at least we got the no hitter intact. But no, it was just one of those things where he was just you could tell he was laboring by the end of that inning. I'm glad they got him out when they did at that 37 pitch mark, because obviously they do that. But like, there's a reason why they do that, because he was just laboring by the end. The confidence was zapped. He looked exhausted. It was just not his night. And I think, like you said, it's going to do a number on his season long stats, but it's also kind of, that's how he's been this season in terms of not being able to find the zone as much as you'd like to see.
Yeah, I mean, he's walked at least 3 hitters in his last 5 starts, including a 5-walk outing and now a 6-walk outing. So, we're probably due here for a stint on the developmental list, just, mostly to sort of clear the head, to work with some pitching coaches behind the scenes on some mechanical stuff. I would like to see them let him start one more time, get that last outing out of his head, and then throw him on the dev list for a couple weeks. And I think the developmental list is a really positive thing for prospects when utilized correctly. And, it can be for Drew. This is, we're still early enough in his development that like a successful season was staying healthy and showing that he still has the kind of stuff that can miss bats. And, we're checking off those boxes. So, of course, like the reliever risk that you're going to hear about in his profile will go up this year. He's been way better against lefties than he's been against righties. With the walks, like people are going to say future reliever, and that's going to impact where he's ranked on prospect list. But at the same time, it's just too early to tell. He's you probably saw in person, like he's still growing into his body. He doesn't look to me when he fills out a jersey like somebody who has like reached the final form of what their body will look like. He looks like he's in transition of like what the weight room is doing to somebody who also grew a bunch in high school. So, we'll see. I think he's a guy that like is going to be a really popular breakout pick for 2025, as he kind of was for this year too. But really talented guy with a bright future. I'd throw this outing away.
And even through all this and through the inability to find the zone this year, I still wouldn't even say that he's been bad this year.
No, not at all.
I mean, he's still only got if you're looking at ERA, a 4.11 ERA this year, which after I'd like to look at it and see what it was before this outing on Friday. But he's honestly hasn't been bad this year. And we knew coming into this year, still working his way back each year from the Tommy John surgery, like the command and control was not going to be there in the way that it will ultimately be there next year, the year after that. So he's still working through things. It's not time to jump off his bandwagon, just like it wasn't time to necessarily jump on the bandwagon before the season. It's just like, let's just wait it out. Let's just see him continue to develop, get more acclimated to his how he's getting stronger, like you said, and just watch him as he continues to grow this season, both physically and mentally, and as just a pitcher in general. So he's still got a ways to go. He's still only 21 years old. So he's a 21-year-old this is age 21 season. I don't know if he's 21 years old. This is his age 21 season in high A. That's fun just to have a guy that age at that level in the rotation. So I'll take it.
Yep. The ERA went from 3.12 to 4.11. So it went up a point. But he's still allowing a 184 batting average, a 290 slug. He's hard for A-ball hitters to hit when he's in the zone. And at the end of the day, like that's sort of what's most important at this age.
A sub 200 batting average against, while also putting up a whip of 1.66 is
pretty
kind of a
wild.
crazy stat.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen ever.
Yeah.
So, all right, you want to talk about Ballesteros here?
Yeah, our guy Mo Baller has been promoted to AAA, which I guess the way that I would say this is, given the Cubs' major league catching situation, if the Cubs were close to first place right now, I would be loudly suggesting that they try him in the major leagues and skip AAA completely.
At
I
DH.
think because it's not going as well at the major league level, it makes sense to follow a more conventional development path. But he's been really impressive. He has earned a promotion. I think it's fine that the Cubs have decided he hasn't earned the promotion, but he is ready for the next step.
Reminder of Ballesteros' stats this season. He's batting in AA this year at age
Huge
20.
pitchers league.
Huge pitchers league. The league-wide OPS in the Southern League this year is 663. 663 OPS in the Southern League. That is worth repeating. This year, he has an 867 OPS. He's batting 299 with a 372 OBP. He's slugging 495. He has a strikeout rate south of 15%. He has a walk rate just shy of 10%. He is second in my bash metric in the organization at 143, right behind Cristian Hernandez, who we'll talk about later. He has been, just across the board, just terrific this year. He's got 9 home runs during his time in Tennessee. He's above average, well above league average in OPS, strikeout rate, and walk rate. He's been exactly what we hoped he would be this year. Is basically the way to put it.
Yes. Yeah. And what's funny is, like, I was thinking about him a bunch today in prep for the show, and like, I wish there's something I could point to people that's like something that's taken this huge leap this year, but like, he's really just like really rounding out sort of all the skills that he's shown before, and it's just sort of coming together. I guess like the best way you can say it is a guy that like was learning how to hit for power, really has a knack for hitting the ball sort of hard on a line, really fights against striking out on 2 strikes, doesn't expand the zone much. Like, he just is putting it all together at the same time for a good stretch here. And the Cubs are right to, see where it goes, to pose him the next challenge, see, what it's going to look like, I guess, catching AAA pitchers, probably getting some feedback from some minor league vets that can really speak to what it's like to throw to him too. I think that'll be really useful for their evaluation. So yeah, it'll be a good challenge for him.
Yeah, with all due respect to Pablo Aliendo, his catching mate in AA Tennessee, I think that Ballesteros is going to get a ton from Ali Sanchez and Bryce Wyndham up in AAA. So that's going to be super fun. Curious. So I've been one over the past few years to compare Moises Ballesteros and Owen Casey, not in terms of exactly their numbers, because their numbers have been different through the course of their careers, but the way in which they've kind of progressed at the plate, starting at both as guys that just all the time went the opposite way. Like you could see that they were going oppo gap with regularity. And they've both transitioned gradually. It wasn't like a quick transition. It was a gradual transition into pulling the ball in the air more. Owen, I think that I want to get your thoughts on it, but like I feel like Moises has actually done a better job of transitioning into that pull side power than what Owen Casey has. Obviously, Owen Casey hits the ball harder, more consistently than what Ballesteros does. But I think that Ballesteros has done a better job of like tapping into that power quicker than what Owen Casey did.
Yeah, Casey did it better last year in a lot of ways than he is this year. If I guess I was ranking the versions of the guys since they've been trying to do it, which I think is the last 2 years, Casey last year is probably the best version of it, then Ballesteros this year, and then probably Casey this year, and then Ballesteros last year being last. But yeah, they are similar in that sense. And, I think it'll probably be useful to have them in the same room for a little while, like working through that together. It's pretty easy for a hitting coach to to coach both of those guys at once, because you're not saying that much different stuff, which is funny for two guys that could not look more different when they fill out a uniform and step to a plate, I'm really excited to see where it goes, because man, if he can catch enough, and all the reports you read from people that are like really sort of doing due diligence on talking to people with the Cubs and stuff this year, is that there's like a little bit more optimism. And a Ballesteros that can catch 50 games a year is going to be really, really valuable, specifically to this organization that does not have a lick of catching right now. So I think it's the right time to force the issue a little bit and try to answer some more questions about what you have here.
One last stat thing that I want to throw out with Moises before we move on is that given the difference in hitting levels between the Southern League and the International League where the Iowa Cubs play, again, looking at league-wide OPS, Southern League 663, International League in AAA is 768. So essentially there's 100 more points of OPS in AAA. It's kind of funny because you're looking at Moises Ballesteros, right? And he's going to likely have a drop off in terms of the stats when he bumps up a level. But he could ultimately have a stat line that looks similar in AAA than it does in AA, and because he's got the it propped up by the league rates, the league environments, but dropped down because of it's just more difficult on him. So like he could be looking at a stat rate, a slash line that looks very, very similar. I'm going to be curious looking at the strikeout rate and walk rate, because he's been consistently right around those areas. I mean, the walk rate is down more this year than it has been in past years, but I'm going to keep a close eye on the strikeout rate, see if it jumps up quite a bit during his time in AAA, because 15% for a slugger like Ballesteros is really, really interesting to watch. So that's my last little stat nugget there.
Yeah, I mean, people in Chicago are just gonna love him. I mean, the short kings out there get plenty of easy love from a fan base, and he is the short king that I can ever remember the Cubs producing. So I'm excited for it when it happens.
We'll come back to another guy that got promoted, but let's real quick. It's interesting watching Moises Ballesteros get promoted up to Iowa and not see James Triantos as of right now. We're recording this on Monday nights, and all of the official word of promotions and roster maneuvering does not typically come until Tuesday afternoonish. We know the Moises Ballesteros news because I think that Greg Zumak broke that, didn't he?
He did.
Which shout out to Zumak. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So we know that for a fact. There's still a chance that James Triantos does get promoted, to be determined. You guys will know by the time you're listening to this potentially. But it's interesting, right? Like they've both been two guys, Ballesteros and Triantos, who have absolutely killed the ball during their time in AA. James Triantos this year is batting .309. He's got a .339 OBP, slugging .468. He's got an .807 OPS. Again, strikeout rate super low, 11%. Walk rate also super low, 4%. He's
Ballesteros is getting promoted because we're halfway into June and he's rocking a 1,000 OPS for June. That's been fantastic. But you know what James Triantos is doing in June?
What's that?
He's hitting .465 with a .767 slugging percentage. He has an OPS of 1256. He has been easily the Smokies' best hitter in June. So I think if people are wondering why it's Ballesteros first and Triantos second, is it because I think pretty simply there's a much more natural path for Ballesteros to help the major league team than there is Triantos right now. And so it makes sense to push the development of somebody who could be like genuinely your 2025 opening day catcher versus somebody who you're going to have to really sort of reconfigure the major league roster a little bit to figure out where JT fits.
Yeah. Triantos, and he's been showing off the pop a whole lot more, which is kind of
so exciting.
I talked about on last week's show the speed from Triantos. That was something that's kind of stood out this year. He's now up to 22 stolen bases with only 3 times caught stealing. I talked about that quite a bit on last week's show. But now the power is starting to show up, and it's like if you can have some of that power, if you can have some of the speed, he could be the best in the National League. But he could like that. That's something there for a more complete offensive profile. You mentioned the fit in terms of Ballesteros being a catcher, and obviously there's a struggle there at a major league level at catcher. Triantos has been playing a lot of second base this year, a lot of second base. He got in 2 games this past week playing center field, which was the first time he's been in center field this year. Triantos still has yet to play any third base this season. Matt Shaw has been positioned over there at third base for most of the year. Matt Shaw's gotten a little bit of second base action. Triantos has gotten 0 third base innings this year. And that's interesting to me. Where do you fall on the James Triantos defensive home situation? I know we talk about it every other week, it seems like, but what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've told this story before on the podcast, but I remember going to the backfields the year that Triantos was drafted for. It was like right before instructional league started, and it was just a bunch of guys sort of messing around, getting their work in. And Triantos was, a couple months removed from being a high schooler, and took some really good BP. But like, what stuck out to me was like I saw him, and I was like, that is a second base body. Like I've seen 100 times in baseball. Like that is a person that you play at second base. He took infield that day, like looked like a second base. I've been like very firm always that I see him as a second baseman. Even when they moved him to third, I was like, that doesn't look right. It didn't go that well. But I was not saying he shouldn't be an infielder. I was just saying move him to second base.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a good year at second base, I think, like real steady. He moves well laterally. There's really no reason it shouldn't work. I think I looked it up. He didn't make an error he made an error the first game of May and the last game of May, but no errors at second base in between. So, that's a good 4-week stretch where he didn't make one.
He's only got 3 errors all year.
Yeah, he's not going to win a Gold Glove, but I don't think he's going to be, somebody who would be worse than like -5. I think he'd be somebody who's in like the -3 to +2 range. And but the outfield thing is interesting. There's no reason not to try guys at new spots. They introduced Triantos to be open to playing the outfield last August when he was in South Bend. Played a few games there. I think the plan was to play there a bunch in the AFL, but if I remember right, he didn't end up doing it. Is that right?
No, he didn't. He got a couple games in at shortstop.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, something happened, I think, with the team there, and they just sort of scrapped the plans, and they said, like, oh, you guys need an infielder more than an outfielder, play him in there. So I think the Cubs are sort of just reintroducing it more as, like, let's see how it looks. Let's see how comfortable it is. Probably, if we're being honest, like both for their own internal use, but also for the use of other organizations. It's just good for everybody to sort of see a look and get an evaluation of him there. But I think more and more, like, he's taken a step forward, specifically in the power department, and is like, I think has really increased his prospect status. And I think more and more looks like somebody you might like want to keep and hoard a little bit. And so it'll be really interesting if if he's a Cub come 2025, like if he's playing the first game of the 2025 season in the Cubs minor leagues, I think that's going to be a telltale sign that the Cubs believe he's a part of their future. And I'm really interested to see how it plays out.
If there's a time that he's going to be traded, you're right. It's this deadline. It's this offseason.
Yeah.
And if he's still around, he's the Cubs' future.
Yep.
If not, he's somewhere else, obviously. But you tweeted at me earlier today, kind of looking at Moises Ballesteros and James Triantos and what their development kind of means to this organization, because overall, it's not like the organization as a whole in terms of depth has been super impressive, and they haven't really taken that next step. But you mentioned Ballesteros and Triantos have, and you have a little bit more confidence in them now and what they are than you did prior to the season and seeing what they're doing in AA this year.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for a farm system is having top 100 prospects and really like top 40 prospects. That moves the needle more than anything else. And I think those guys are sort of on the path to achieve that. And that's a really big deal for this farm system, because those were 2 guys that, like, I think you could kind of have gone either way on this offseason. You know, I mean, you could have made a really good case for sticking your neck out and putting them in your top 5 in the system, or like they could have been your 10th prospect and you could have made that argument really well too. Now, like them pushing up to like be firmly in the argument for like, you know, 3rd and 4th and things like that, like that matters a ton. And it honestly, it matters more than like the fact that the Cubs haven't come up with a great number 12 prospect. Like that's less important in a vacuum. But yeah, the sort of dichotomy between those two things stuck out to me today.
And pretty simply put, both Triantos and Ballesteros were borderline top 100 guys entering the season.
Yeah.
A couple places had one or the other. Nobody really had both Ballesteros and Triantos as top 100 guys. Most places had neither in the top 100. Right. And now they're both pretty firmly top 100 dudes. You can make the argument that one is like a top, take your pick on which one. One's a top 75 guy and one's clearly a top 100 guy. So it's like that's right there shows the development of these two guys over the course of the season.
Yep.
Let's go to one more guy that did get the promotion, reportedly, from AA Tennessee up to AAA Iowa, and that is our guy, Frankie Scalzo Jr.
That's your guy.
Yeah, Frankie Scalzo Jr. Got to find a way to talk about Frankie every chance we get. And I mean, if there's ever a guy who deserved a promotion, it was Frankie Scalzo Jr. I mean, we're up to 26 consecutive innings. 26 innings to start the season without giving up a run. That is an outrageous number. He has only given up in those 26 innings. He's only given up 11 hits. He's given up no runs, obviously. He has walked 6. He's only struck out 17, but like obviously 0 ERA. He's got a whip of 0.65 on the season. It's we've talked about it. We've talked about him plenty, right? We got to give him another shout out here. But like we talked about him plenty, like the stuff is not outrageously nasty. He doesn't look like Porter Hodge up there. He doesn't even look like Michael Arias up there. But he's getting outs. The slider is good. Like the stuff is good enough, and I think the stuff is good enough to compete in AAA. See what he does. I'm just excited to see how long this scoreless inning streak goes for.
I know. Yeah, I mean, the Cubs obviously wanted to take this a little slower than the guys that, like Eduardo Nunez, the guys on the 40-man, like Porter Hodge, Michael Arias. You know, I think those guys, the decisions needed to happen a little more urgently. So, like, I think the Cubs were like, I don't know. I mean, this isn't really like how their brains work, but like probably like sort of hoping that he'd give up a run there to like justify him still being there while they were trying to find out information more on those other guys. Yeah. And he's just like kept forcing the issue. Like this should be praised as a guy who like just refused to be in AA any longer. You know, I mean, that's the coolest. Like when promotions happen that way, that's the best to me, is just like a guy that like the people in player development at the Cubs were like, darn it, like we have to do it, you know? And like, that's really cool. Frankie should be so proud of the way he started this season. And he's on the map now. He's Rule 5 eligible this offseason. So the Cubs do have to make a choice by the end of the year on him. And so if he continues to look really good, then he probably and if they reach the point where they're like, we're going to protect him from the Rule 5 draft anyway, then he's a major league option in August and September. So like he has put himself on the major league radar in 2024, which is 100% not something I thought was possible for him this year. I thought if it happened, it was going to be 2025, and he has pressed the ETA issue, which is great.
Yeah, the Cubs are going to be in a really weird situation come this offseason, because we talk on the show a lot about these relievers that have been very, very good, and we like what they do a lot. But somebody needs to break out, I think, because if you look at guys that are no longer prospects, and Daniel Palencia and Luke Little, they're obviously young relievers. You got 40-man roster guys already, in addition to Little and Palencia, which are Porter Hodge and Michael Arias. Those are obviously guys that are taking up spots on the 40-man roster.
And Ethan Roberts, which we'll talk about.
And Ethan Roberts, which we'll talk about. And then you also have Frankie Scalzo Jr. is Rule 5 eligible, like you mentioned. Zach Lee is also Rule 5 eligible this offseason.
Hunter Biggie.
Hunter Biggie's Rule 5 eligible, and Eduardo Nunez is minor league free agent eligible this offseason. So those are, 9 guys right there that are all like fighting for 4 spots. Right now, there's four of those guys are on the 40-man roster. So
Michael Ernst pointed out on Twitter this week that like the real failure the Cubs organization has done in player development the last couple of years is getting pitchers, getting specifically relievers over the hump from like looking like a major league threat to like existing firmly in a major league bullpen. It's like they've been capable of getting guys to look really good for 5 to 10 outings, but then it always has sort of regressed. They have not sort of gotten that full push through. And when it comes to this group, like 2 or 3 of these guys are not going to be with the Cubs next year. And so the Cubs, it is now imperative. The Cubs are on the clock. They have 3 months to identify the right people from that group to keep, and then the right people to let go in whatever way is like sort of forced upon them. And like, you have to be right. I mean, the Cubs, the 2024 Cubs show you have to be right. You were wrong about Jeremiah Estrada. It's biting you in the ass. You were wrong about Bryan Hudson, who is the best reliever for the team who's destroying you in your division. So like, you got to make these decisions better than you've made these decisions. And like you said, you got 9 guys to choose from. So, find someone and
figure it out. Right? Just like figure it out. I don't know the answer. I look at I started taking a look at my prospect rankings, my prospect list, which is going to be posted over at Northside Bound, I believe, next month, some in the next few weeks or so.
Yeah.
And so I started taking like the first serious look at how I would kind of reorganize my list today. And I was looking at like I always try to include some relievers towards like the back end of a prospect list. And I was looking at some of those names. I was like, I don't know how I rank one guy over the other. How do I rank Zach Lee over or under Hunter Biggie? How do I rank Frankie Scalzo in that mix? How do I rank if we're going down to I don't think that Riley Martin is that caliber, but where does he fall in the mix of everything? Like it's really hard with this group of relievers. I'm glad it's not my job with the Cubs to decide who to keep, who to add to the 40-man roster, and who to move on from, because that's not an easy job to have right now. That's for sure. Let's go ahead and transition. I was planning. Let's go ahead and transition into Ethan Roberts, because we're talking relievers here.
Mm-hmm.
Ethan Roberts, friend of the show, friend of everybody, not just friend of the show, friend of literally everybody that exists on Earth. Ethan Roberts was added to the 40-man roster. He reportedly had an opt-out on, I believe it was June 15th or June 16th, because he signed a minor league deal to come back to the Cubs this offseason. And he was out of the 40-man roster. Jose Cuas was designated for assignments, and Ethan Roberts is back. He did not get selected for the major league team, so he's back in AAA, but he's on the 40-man roster. He's ready to roll as soon as the Cubs feel comfortable. And that is the path that he took to get here, and the fact that he was added back to the 40-man roster is just gets me so excited for him. I am so happy for Ethan Roberts to be back on a 40-man roster.
Yeah, Ethan and his family, just, Ethan worked so hard for this. He had such a long break away from pitching, which I know is sort of driving him crazy. And all he wanted to do was be out there again. And I'm sure, like, when you're out that long, a lot of doubt enters your mind, like, especially a guy like him that exists with these hyper unique qualities that are that are a matter of inches, I mean, what's special about Ethan is that he throws a fastball that cuts more than any fastball in baseball. And there had to be some doubt, like, when I come back to pitching and I grip a fastball and throw it again, is it still going to cut that much, or is it going to cut half that amount? And then his value is way less. And, what's been exciting this year is that, that it really has come back, that he's still capable. I mean, he's thrown sliders this year that have swept more than 2 feet. I mean, he's essentially throwing cutters that move more than any other pitch and throwing sliders that sweep more than any other pitch in baseball. And so that's really cool. I'm happy for him. I think great job by his agent getting the opt-out date in the contract for this year. that allowed Ethan to then force the issue with his good play on the field. Good work by Ethan's team there. But he deserves this and earned this.
Yeah, and I think he is already at the point coming back that he is difficult on right-handed hitters. He can get lefties out to a certain degree. Right-handed hitters, it is hard to hit him as a right-handed hitter, and I think that he is one of the 8 best relievers in the organization at getting right-handed hitters out. Now, is that enough to get a call up to Chicago tomorrow? Maybe. I think that there's plenty of issues going on in that Chicago bullpen, so you might as well give it a try.
He's gonna get a look at some point. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of time before you see him back in Chicago. I think that the confidence that the Cubs had to add him to the 40-man roster, the confidence that Ethan Roberts gave the Chicago Cubs to add him to the 40-man roster, and designated, like, getting rid of Jose Cuas, who you just traded for, partially because of his years of team control last year.
Yep.
That's not an easy decision to make. I know Jose Cuas has not been very good. I understand that, but you traded for him, and you have equity in Jose Cuas in the form of trading away Nelson Velasquez.
Yep.
And that's not an easy decision to make. So the fact that, like, he forced the issue in terms of his what he's shown on the field in his return is just wildly impressive to me.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, let's go back. We're going to go from a guy in AAA who I guess Ethan is still technically a prospect because he hasn't exceeded rookie limits. Well, but he's on the 60-man, right? So I guess, has he?
Yeah, he probably is not a prospect
because he was on the 60-man, or he was on the 60-day IL, which is technically MLB service time. So I think
right.
he's not a prospect. So going from a guy who's not a prospect anymore to a guy in the lowest levels of the minors for now in Myrtle Beach, Cristian Hernandez. Is Cristian Hernandez back, dude? Is he back? He's not back to what our ridiculous expectations were prior to last year, but he might be back to, like, where we should have had expectations to begin with, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we said last year, I said a couple times, I remember, like, he was doing the small things really well and the big things not well. Like, he was running the bases really well. He was playing good defense, but the hitting was a mess. He has found a way to sort of continue doing those small things really well, while also, improving the hitting, like, pretty much across the board. And it's been really impressive. I said this on Twitter today. You and I were in a conversation with it. Like, he has a 391 batting average with balls in play. And the Cubs, like, if you look in the last 15 years of the Cubs organization, like, there have been a lot of guys that have had, like, high, low A batting averages fueled by real high BABIP. And the success rate of turning those guys into major leaguers is not super high. So, like, I think there needs to be some level of caution on getting the hope train back up and rolling. I do not think this is a top 100 prospect yet. But the fact that he's walking 15% of the time and striking out, under 25% of the time is huge. I think when I see it on tape, it looks like he's a lot more comfortable waiting to make his swing decision because he's shorter to the ball. It's much more like, it's kind of choppy almost with his hands now. It's just like, get the bat to the ball as quick as possible, producing a lot of ground balls that way. I think that, like, that hope of what his power could be based on his swing when he was 15 years old and the bat speed he was producing then, like, that's not there with the swing he has right now. And so that has sort of gone out the window if you're measuring the guy that's on the field right now. And then the Cubs will have that decision ahead of them. Do we change the swing? Do we start to move the swing back? Or is that too scary because, like, we knew that, like, that guy was really struggling to sort of barrel up balls swinging that way. So, that'll be really interesting to see sort of what their next developmental choice they make is.
Yeah, I think you're looking at a guy that before the 2023 season, the window of potential outcomes was about as wide as you could possibly get, right? Like, the highest of upside, the lowest of downside, right? And I think that this year you're starting to see that window just, like, shrink a little bit, where, like, the upside isn't nearly as high as it was, but also now he's showing that there is some floor there, right? There's some the floor isn't like he's not going to make it out of low A. So there's still a wide range of outcomes, but there's fewer potential outcomes than there was a year ago, or a year and a half ago. He is the 391 BABIP is, from what I can tell, the highest in the organization by a long shot. I'm looking at, well, I guess, in that amount of plate appearances, it's the longest by the highest by a long shot. So that's worth keeping in mind. The 304 batting average is fun to see. He's starting to slug over the past few weeks or so, which is because he was not slugging at all prior to about a month ago. He was not slugging at all. So he is starting to slug a little bit more. Like I mentioned, he does have the highest bash in the organization at 148, which is that would be the high. I've tracked bash for the last 3 years, like for everybody in the organization.
Right.
This is my third year, and that is by far the highest number. Last year, Jefferson Rojas had the highest number in the history of bash, in the short history, at 135, and Cristian Hernandez has 148 right now. So crazy high number, but also worth pointing out too that bash does incorporate stolen bases and caught stealings into the equation. It's not just hitting. And he's stolen 26 bags this year, which is the most in the organization. Only been caught 4 times. So, like, he's just offensively. If you don't look at the BABIP, if you don't look at the batting average and balls in play, the line is just tremendous all across the board. And I think even with the high BABIP, I think he's probably getting closer to being ready to be promoted up to South Bend. I think he's inching closer and closer to that. The problem is you got Jefferson Rojas manning shortstop for the South Bend Cubs. Maybe you play some Cristian Hernandez at second base. Maybe you spend some more time with Jefferson Ross at second, but you also have Ed Howard, which is a different conversation on how to handle it. It's an interesting conversation. Is Cristian Hernandez ready for South Bend? Possibly. Yeah. I think that like we're getting closer every single day, but I don't know. I just don't know if the Cubs will be willing to pull the trigger on that quite yet.
I can guarantee you one thing. Hernandez will be the most asked about player in trade conversations that the Cubs would realistically have, because the Cubs are not going to likely commit the equity with this team to make a massive trade at this deadline. It will be more like rental type players. Mm-hmm. And he is such a fit for another team to ask about. If you call about a reliever, if you call about a catcher rental, like one of those, every time back in a conversation, you're going to be like Cristian Hernandez. And the Cubs will have a decision on their hands. Like, are we comfortable with the idea of trading somebody with this talent level in a deal for a rental for a team that is below 500? That's a really tricky choice. There are obviously trades where, like, if another team asks for Cristian Hernandez, like, we are comfortable with them trading him in deals for good players. I think the question that's really interesting for us to just all ask ourselves as people that follow this is like, would you trade him for Hunter Harvey with the Nationals? I don't know. That's good. There's going to be a different answer for everybody, but I'll be fascinated if the Cubs do find the right deal to put him in, because I know he's going to get asked about.
I can tell you the answer from about 90% of our listeners on the show, that the answer is likely no for Hunter Harvey. But yeah, no, that's a great point. It becomes a really interesting question. So that is all I had as far as current Cubs prospects. But I teased at the top end of the show that we were going to talk about one former Cubs prospect.
Speaking of Cubs Nationals trades.
Exactly. There's one former Cubs prospect who went out in his third career start this past week. His name is DJ Herz, and he put together a historic performance, really, historic in a lot of different ways. He went 6 innings pitched on the mound. He gave up only 1 hit in his 6 innings, no earned runs, 0 walks, and he struck out 13 batters. DJ Herz did that, dude. DJ Herz did that. I'm so happy. I mean, the Cubs fan in me is like, they did it again. The biggest DJ Herz fan is just so happy. I love it. I loved to see that. When I didn't get a chance to watch the game of it. I wasn't tuned in for the game, but I was checking Twitter after I came back I think I was coming back from South Bend or something. But And I checked the line score. I was like, oh my God, he did the thing. He did it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you remember the outing I'm talking about, but DJ had an outing when he was with the Pelicans a couple years ago. He went back home to Fayetteville and pitched against the Fayetteville team in front of all his family and had just an absolutely incredible outing. I don't have the line score in front of me, but it was one of those outings that I knew like during the outing that I was going to write about it for Bleacher Nation the next day, which were always really fun to write, just like 800 words on like one minor league start.
Mm-hmm.
And that outing just reminded me so much of that. And it was like, oh my gosh, like he's doing this not against low A hitters in, a small town in North Carolina. He's doing this on the biggest possible stage with like very similar stuff to what he had back then. Like it just like all translated. I think the question with DJ back then was like, will it translate to like the awkward swings he's getting now? Will he get that against hitters that are a little better? And, the Marlins aren't the best collections of hitters you're ever going to find, but it's the highest level of baseball, and they were pretty awkward swings. And that's really cool.
That outing against Fayetteville back in 2021 was 4 innings, 1 hit, no runs, 3 walks, 10 strikeouts.
So he just added, he added 2 innings and 3 strikeouts.
It's one of those things. Like, he was popping. He hit 94, 95 on the gun a few times during his time or during that outing for Washington, and that was something when we covered him coming up, we're like we just want to see more of those 94s, 95s, less of those 90s, 91s, and he can still be a guy that sits in the lower 90s and still be successful, but given his delivery, which has not been tweaked. That was kind of like, when the Nationals get him, will they tweak with his delivery, his kind of quirky delivery? And they have not really. I mean, it looks pretty much the same in terms of the way he's going out in there and getting out. So we know the changeup's terrific. He's flashing that slider a little bit. The fastball was playing up enough. I don't know, dude. I'm so happy. I'm frustrated that the Cubs traded him away for Jeimer Candelario for a few months, but like DJ Herz going out in there and getting after it is. I want to see him stick. I want to see him continue doing that for the Washington Nationals, and he's a great situation, right? Where the Nationals are up and coming, I'd say. They're not a good team, but I also wouldn't consider the Washington Nationals to be like god awful. And I think that DJ's in a pretty good position to carve out a role in Washington, which is super fun.
Totally agree.
All right, man. That's it. That's all I've got for this episode. Do you want to plug anything? Do you want to talk? Is there any shout outs you want to give while we're wrapping up the show?
Well, you hit on it, but our guy Zumac breaking the Mo Baller news on the 1060 West Discord was a really cool thing for the week for Greg, for the Discord itself, and definitely something that Cubs fans in this space I think would really enjoy being a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. So go check out 1060 West Discord. I know that you can probably send out a link to join. Zumac can, all that good stuff. That is worth joining and checking out, because there's lots of fun conversations being had, whether it's prospects or non-prospect talk as well. So go check that out. You can follow Bryan over on Twitter at Cub Prospects. You can follow me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. Check out the Instagram for the podcast at Cubs on Deck. I think it's Cubs on Deck on Instagram. And you can find the podcast anywhere where you listen to podcasts. Check us out on YouTube. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you guys think about the Moises to Iowa, James Triantos not to Iowa, or tell us what you think about James Triantos if the news breaks 24 hours from now as we're recording this. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Really appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will be back in one short week. Take care, guys.
Go Cubs.
Yeah.